On January 19, 1946, a baby girl was born in a one-room cabin on the banks of the Little Pigeon River in Locust Ridge, Tennessee. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, and no insulation against the January cold. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, a sharecropper who could not read or write, paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. Her mother, A.V. Lee, was 22 years old and already raising 3 children. They named the baby Dolly Rebecca. She doesn't know yet that she will write over 3,000 songs, sell more than 100 million records, and build a fortune worth nearly $500 million, starting with a voice her first producers told her was too high-pitched for country radio. She doesn't know yet that she will refuse Elvis Presley's request to record her most famous song because his manager demanded half the publishing, and that 18 years later, Whitney Houston will turn that same song into one of the best-selling singles in the history of recorded music. She doesn't know yet that she will give away 300 million books to children who remind her of her father. She doesn't know yet that a man named Carl Dean will see her outside a laundromat on her very first day in Nashville, marry her 2 years later, and stay married to her for 58 years until he dies in March of 2025. And she does not know that 17 months after burying him, on August 25, 2026, she will follow, inside a cancer ward at Vanderbilt, in the same city where it all started. Welcome to Country Mysteries. The thing about Dolly Parton's childhood is that she never tried to make it sound worse than it was. She didn't need to. 12 children, a cabin so small the kids slept 4 to a bed, and winters where the snow blew through the cracks in the walls and covered the blankets by morning. Mama used to tack newspapers and magazine pages to the walls to try and keep the wind out, Dolly recalled. I'd lie there at night reading the walls. In a house with no books, the insulation was the library. Robert Lee Parton worked tobacco fields, construction jobs, anything that paid. He never learned to read, a fact that Dolly would carry with her for the rest of her life, and that would eventually drive her to build the largest free children's book program on Earth. But that was decades away. In 1950, Robert Lee was just a man trying to feed a family that kept getting bigger and failing more months than not. A.V. Lee held the household together through a combination of Pentecostal faith, mountain folk medicine, and a singing voice that could shake the walls of the Caton's Chapel Church every Sunday. Dolly inherited that voice. She also inherited something harder to name, a refusal to accept the boundaries other people drew for her. I knew what I looked like as a child, Dolly told an interviewer in 1977. I was scrawny, I was ugly, I had sores on my legs from mosquito bites because we didn't have screens. But I always felt beautiful inside. By the time she was 7, Dolly had taught herself to play a homemade guitar, a few broken strings stretched across an old mandolin neck. By 10, she was performing on a local Knoxville radio show hosted by Cass Walker, a grocery store magnate who doubled as a regional talent scout. Walker paid her almost nothing, but he put her in front of a microphone, and that was enough. I didn't care about the money, she said later. I just wanted to sing. At 13, Dolly made her Grand Ole Opry debut. She sang a song, got a standing ovation, and went backstage to meet Johnny Cash, who bent down and told her, "You're going to do great things." It was 1959. Cash was already a legend, and Dolly was a kid in a borrowed dress from Sevierville, Tennessee. But she believed him. And honestly, he wasn't wrong about much that year, except maybe his own ability to stay out of trouble, as we covered in episode 9. The morning after Dolly graduated from Sevier County High School in 1964, she packed her clothes into cardboard boxes and got on a Greyhound bus to Nashville. Her classmates had voted her most likely to succeed, though most of them probably assumed she'd succeed at something less ambitious than conquering the entire American entertainment industry. She was 18, she had no money, and she had exactly one plan: become a star. The bus ticket cost $11. Nashville in 1964 was not waiting for Dolly Parton. Music Row was a boys' club with a dress code, and the producers who ran it had very specific ideas about what a female country singer should sound like, mainly like Patsy Cline, who had died the year before and left a hole nobody seemed interested in filling with anything new. Dolly's voice was too high, too Appalachian, too different. "They kept telling me I sounded like a little girl," she said. Well, I was a little girl. On her very first day in the city, standing outside the wishy-washy laundromat on the corner, she met a tall, quiet man named Carl Thomas Dean. He was 21, drove a white Chevy, and worked in his family's asphalt paving business. "I was walking down the street, and he hollered at me from his truck," Dolly recalled. He said, "You're going to get sunburned," and I said, "I got me a whole lifetime to get sunburned." They married on May 30th, 1966, in a tiny church in Ringgold, Georgia, just the two of them, the preacher and his wife. Carl Dean would go on to become the most invisible husband in the history of American celebrity. In 58 years of marriage, he attended virtually none of her concerts, avoided every red carpet, and gave almost no interviews. "My husband is not in show business," Dolly once said. "He's in the asphalt business. And I'm glad." That quiet asphalt man would be the last hand she reached for when the world finally started going dark. But in 1966, Dolly's career was still a work in progress. She signed with Monument Records and released a few singles that went nowhere special. Then came Dumb Blonde in early 1967, a sharp, self-aware track that climbed to number 24 on the country charts. It wasn't a smash, but it was enough to get noticed. The person who noticed was Porter Wagoner. Porter's longtime girl singer, Norma Jean, had quit his nationally syndicated TV show, and he needed a replacement fast. He offered Dolly $60,000 a year, a fortune to a girl who'd arrived in Nashville with cardboard suitcases. She said yes. What followed was 7 years of duets, awards, backstage wars, and a $3 million lawsuit. But we told that story in detail back in episode 2. If you haven't seen it, go watch it after this one. Maha Meander. It's one of my favorite episodes we've done, honestly. The short version? They made great music together, they nearly destroyed each other, and Dolly wrote "I Will Always Love You" as a goodbye letter to the man she couldn't stand working for anymore. She walked out of Porter's world in February 1974. The song went to number 1. And Dolly Parton's real career, the one that didn't belong to anyone else, finally began. Free of Porter Wagoner, Dolly moved fast. In late 1973, she had already released Jolene, a song she wrote about a red-haired bank teller in Nashville who had been flirting with Carl Dean. The song was deceptively simple, a woman begging another woman not to take her man. But the desperation in Dolly's voice, the way the melody spiraled downward like someone losing their grip, it was devastating. Jolene hit number 1 on the country charts and crossed over to pop audiences who had never heard of the Grand Ole Opry. It has since been covered more times than almost any other country song, hundreds of versions in dozens of languages. Then came the Elvis moment. In 1974, Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's notoriously predatory manager, contacted Dolly and told her Elvis wanted to record "I Will Always Love You." Dolly was thrilled. Then Parker added the condition: Elvis would only do it if Dolly signed over 50% of the publishing rights. "I cried all night," Dolly recalled in a 2022 interview with Rolling Stone. "I said, 'I'm sorry, but I can't give you half of my publishing. That song is like one of my children.'" She turned Elvis Presley down. In 1974, that was roughly equivalent to turning down God. But Dolly understood something most Nashville songwriters didn't. The publishing was the product, not the performance. That single decision would eventually be worth tens of millions of dollars, and in my opinion, It's one of the smartest business moves anyone in country music has ever made. By 1977, Dolly had crossed over completely. Here You Come Again became her first pop top 10 hit, selling over 1 million copies. Nashville purists accused her of selling out. "I'm not leaving country," she fired back. "I'm taking it with me." It was the kind of line that sounded rehearsed, and probably was, but it also happened to be true. In 1980, she starred alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin in the movie 9 to 5, playing a secretary who helps kidnap her sexist boss. The theme song, which she wrote, was nominated for an Academy Award and topped both the country and pop charts simultaneously. Dolly was now a movie star, a pop star, and a country legend all at once. And then Whitney Houston made her rich beyond anything Nashville had ever seen. In 1992, Houston recorded "I Will Always Love You" for the soundtrack of The Bodyguard. The cover became a global phenomenon, 14 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Diamond certified, one of the best-selling singles of all time. Every time it played on the radio, in a mall, in a wedding, in a karaoke bar, Dolly Parton, the songwriter, got paid. When Whitney's version came out, Dolly said, "I sat in my car and cried. Then I went to the bank and cried some more." She used the royalties to buy an office complex in a predominantly black neighborhood in Nashville. She called it the house that Whitney built. By the mid-1990s, Dolly had quietly assembled one of the most formidable business empires in American entertainment. Her own record label, publishing company, production house, and a 50% stake in Dollywood, a theme park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, that drew 3 million visitors a year. The girl who'd been paid with a sack of cornmeal was now worth hundreds of millions. And she was just getting started on the part of her legacy that had nothing to do with money. The most remarkable thing about Dolly Parton's marriage to Carl Dean is how aggressively boring it was, and how deliberate that boredom was. Carl Dean attended exactly one of Dolly's concerts in their entire 58-year marriage. He went in the early 1970s, decided he didn't like the noise, and never went again. He never appeared on a talk show, never walked a red carpet, and was photographed so rarely that most Americans couldn't have picked him out of a lineup. "People ask me how we stayed married so long," Dolly said in a 2020 interview with Oprah. "I always say, because he stays home." It was a joke, but it was also the truth. Their arrangement was simple. Dolly got the spotlight, Carl got the couch. She traveled 9 months a year, he paved driveways and watched TV. They spoke on the phone every night, no matter what time zone she was in. They never had children. When interviewers asked why, Dolly's answer was always the same. "God didn't mean for me to have kids so everybody else's kids could be mine." That line wasn't just a soundbite. In 1988, Dolly launched the Dollywood Foundation, initially to address the high school dropout rate in Sevier County, her home county, one of the poorest in Tennessee. She offered every 7th and 8th grader a deal. "Stay in school, keep your grades up, and I'll give you $500 toward college." The dropout rate fell by nearly half. Then in 1995, she started the project that would define her legacy more than any song ever could. The Dolly Parton Imagination Library was born from a painfully simple idea. Mail 1 free book a month to every child under 5 who signed up, regardless of family income. She started it in Sevier County, inspired by the memory of her father, a brilliant man who lived his whole life unable to read. "I wanted to do something for Daddy," she told NPR. "He was the smartest man I knew, and he couldn't read a lick." The program grew. County by county, state by state, then country by country. By 2026, the Imagination Library had mailed over 300 million free books to children across 5 countries, shipping 3.4 million books every month. It was, by volume, the largest privately funded book gifting program in history. And Dolly funded it without a single dollar of government money. I've covered a lot of lives on this show, and I can tell you, nobody else even comes close to that. Meanwhile, Dollywood was transforming from a regional theme park into one of the most visited destinations in the American Southeast. By the mid-2000s, it employed over 4,000 people, most of them from the same hollows and ridges where Dolly grew up barefoot. "Some people think I'm just a dumb blonde with big hair," she told the New York Times in 2019. "I don't mind. I know what I am." What she was, underneath the wigs and the sequins and the carefully maintained persona of the lovable hillbilly, was one of the most quietly ruthless business operators in American entertainment. She retained ownership of every song she ever wrote, all 3,000 of them. She controlled her own publishing, her own image, and her own narrative. She once told a reporter, "It costs a lot of money to look this cheap." It was meant as a joke. It was also a mission statement. By 2020, Dolly had been famous for longer than most of her fans had been alive. She had won 11 Grammy Awards, sold out arenas on 6 continents, been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She had donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University's COVID-19 vaccine research, money that directly funded the development of the Moderna vaccine. She had given away more books than most publishing houses had printed. And she was still touring, still writing, still performing 3-hour shows in platform heels. But the first crack in the armor came from the quietest place in her life. Carl Dean died on March 3, 2025. He was 82. Dolly announced it the way Carl would have wanted, quietly, with a short post on social media and no press conference. They had been married for 58 years. In the grand tradition of Carl Dean, even his death was a private affair. The funeral was immediate family only. No cameras, no eulogies from Nashville executives, no celebrity guests. Just the people who knew him as Carl, not as Dolly Parton's invisible husband. For Dolly, the loss was seismic, not because it was sudden, but because it erased the one constant in a life built on controlled chaos. Carl had been sick for a while before he died, and Dolly had spent months caring for him, driving him to appointments, managing medications, sitting with him through long nights at home in Brentwood, Tennessee. She later admitted that she had completely ignored her own health during that period. "I was so focused on taking care of him," she told People magazine, "that I forgot to take care of me." The cracks started showing within months. In September 2025, Dolly missed a scheduled appearance at Dollywood to celebrate a new attraction, something she almost never did. She posted a video message explaining she was dealing with a kidney stone that had caused an infection. It sounded minor. It wasn't. Later that same month, she announced the postponement of her highly anticipated Las Vegas residency at the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace. The residency had been the centerpiece of her 2025 to 2026 calendar, multiple sold-out shows, a production team already in place, sets built, tickets on sale. She cited a few procedures she needed to address ongoing health challenges. The industry took it in stride. Dolly Parton had been indestructible for 60 years. A kidney stone wasn't going to stop her. But in May 2026, Dolly officially canceled the Las Vegas residency entirely. In an Instagram video that was notably stripped of her usual sparkle, she explained that while she was responding well to medications and treatments for kidney stones and immune-related issues, the side effects, specifically what she described as feeling swimmy-headed, made it impossible for her to perform at the level she demanded of herself. "If I can't give you the best show you've ever seen," she said, looking directly into the camera, "then I'd rather not come at all." The statement was pure Dolly, gracious, self-deprecating, in control. But the people who knew her heard something different. Dolly Parton did not cancel shows. I cannot stress this enough. She had performed through broken ribs, through stomach flu, through grief, through everything Nashville and the road had thrown at her for half a century. The fact that she was voluntarily stepping away from a stage was, for those paying attention, the most alarming thing she had ever said. By the summer of 2026, Dolly had pulled back from nearly all public commitments. She gave a handful of interviews, including one with People magazine just days before her death, in which she acknowledged she'd been going through hard times with her health, but insisted she was still writing songs and planning new projects. "I've still got a lot of things I want to do," she said. "The Lord ain't done with me yet." It was the kind of line she had been delivering her entire career, part faith, part defiance, part brand management. But this time, the Lord apparently had other plans. The specific type of cancer has never been publicly disclosed. Her family chose not to share the diagnosis, and Dolly, who had been exquisitely transparent about almost everything else in her life, apparently agreed. What her representatives confirmed, in a statement released hours after her death, was that she had fought a brief battle with cancer, a phrase that, in the language of celebrity publicists, usually means the diagnosis came late or moved fast. She died on Monday, August 25, 2026, at the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville, Tennessee. She was 80 years old. By a coincidence that feels too precise to be random, Vanderbilt was the same institution where, 6 years earlier, she had donated $1 million to fund COVID-19 vaccine research, money that helped develop the Moderna vaccine that ultimately saved millions of lives. Dolly Parton died in a hospital she had personally helped keep open. I don't know how to process that, and I'm not sure anyone does. Her nephew, Brian Seaver, announced her death through a video posted to Dolly's official Instagram account. It was a short, steady message, Seaver clearly fighting to hold himself together, confirming that she had passed away peacefully, surrounded by her loved ones. The video was viewed millions of times within the hour. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming, in a way that felt genuinely different from the usual cycle of celebrity death and social media grief. California Governor Gavin Newsom ordered flags on state buildings to be flown at half-staff for a country singer from Tennessee. Dollywood released a statement mourning their dreamer-in-chief and vowing to keep her legacy of joy, hope, and togetherness alive. The Grand Ole Opry held a moment of silence before its Tuesday show. Goldie Hawn, Reese Witherspoon, and dozens of other public figures posted tributes. Country radio stations across America played "I Will Always Love You" on a loop. But the tributes that cut deepest weren't from celebrities. They came from parents. Thousands of them, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, in local newspaper comment sections, sharing photos of the Imagination Library books that arrived in their mailboxes every month. A woman in rural Kentucky posted a picture of her 3-year-old daughter reading a Dolly book on the porch of a house that looked almost exactly like the cabin on the Little Pigeon River. "She gave my kid something my family could never afford," the woman wrote. "And she never asked for anything back." That was the paradox of Dolly Parton. She built her career on spectacle, the wigs, the nails, the bust, the twang, the deliberate performance of dumb blonde that she weaponized into a $450 million brand. She was, by every measure, one of the most image-conscious entertainers who ever lived. And yet the thing people will remember longest has nothing to do with her image. It's a cardboard envelope arriving in a mailbox once a month with a free book inside, addressed to a child who might not own any other books. 300 million of them. Dolly Rebecca Parton, born in a one-room cabin to a man who couldn't read, died in one of the finest medical centers in the world, a center she had helped fund with the royalties from a song she refused to give to Elvis Presley. There is no version of that sentence that doesn't sound like fiction. But every word of it is true. In the days after her death, the question everyone asked, on cable news, on podcasts, in think pieces and op-eds was, who replaces Dolly Parton? The honest answer is, nobody. Not because she was the best singer, or the best songwriter, or the richest businesswoman in Nashville, though she was arguably all three, but because no one else managed to occupy the exact cultural position she held. She was simultaneously a country traditionalist and a pop crossover, a feminist icon who dressed like a beauty pageant contestant, a fiercely private person married to a man nobody had ever met, who was also one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. A billionaire philanthropist who still talked like she was sitting on the porch of a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. These contradictions weren't bugs, they were the product. And nobody else has figured out how to replicate the formula, because the formula was her. She made you feel like you were the only person in the room, Reese Witherspoon wrote in her tribute. Even when there were 10,000 people in the room. The numbers tell part of the story. Over 3,000 songs written. Over 100 million records sold. 11 Grammy Awards. 44 top 10 country albums. 2 Academy Award nominations. A Kennedy Center honor. A Presidential Medal of Freedom. Induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A theme park that employed 4,000 people and drew 3 million visitors a year. A net worth estimated at $450 million. A book program that mailed 3.4 million free books every month to children in 5 countries. But the numbers missed the point. What Dolly Parton understood, and what most people in her industry never figured out, was that fame is a tool, not a destination. She used her fame to build things that would outlast her music: a library system, a park, a foundation, a community. She treated her celebrity the way her father treated a field, as something to be worked, not admired. "I'm not greedy," she once said in an interview with The Guardian. "I'm just determined." There's a difference. Dollywood will continue to operate. The Imagination Library has its own endowment and infrastructure designed to survive its founder. The songs will keep generating royalties for decades. Carl Dean's family and Dolly's siblings will inherit an estate that includes publishing rights to one of the most valuable catalogs in the history of popular music. The Whigs, I assume, will be retired with full honors. In a 2003 interview with Barbara Walters, Dolly was asked how she wanted to be remembered. "I want people to say, she did pretty good for a poor little girl from the Smoky Mountains," she answered. Then she paused, adjusted her wig, and added, "and that she looks pretty good for her age." She was 57. She had 23 years left. She had no idea how much more she would do with them. Look, we've covered a lot of hard stories on this show. Murdered singers, barroom shootings, stolen corpses, planes falling out of the sky. Dolly's story is different. She wasn't murdered. She wasn't betrayed by the industry. She didn't die in a ditch with a needle in her arm. She died at 80, in a world-class hospital, surrounded by people who loved her, after doing more good with her money than most governments manage in a decade. If that's the worst country music can throw at you, you've won. But here's the thing that gets me. She spent her last 17 months without Carl. The man who stayed home so she could go everywhere. The man who married her in a church with no guests. And when he left, she started leaving too. Draw your own conclusions on that one. Tell me in the comments, what's your Dolly song? Not your favorite, your Dolly song. The one that found you. Drop it below. Next time on Country Mysteries, a man with a voice they compared to George Jones, a secret nobody in Nashville saw coming, and a gun fired on his own 43rd birthday. The story of Mel Street. Imev Roman. I've been Roman. Thanks for being here. Take care of each other. Cheers.